thank you, first of all, to organizers for preparing this great event and for letting me present today. I would also like to thank you, thanks to all the panelists from today and from previous days and from tomorrow in advance for many inspiring insights on this such a contemporary issue. Okay, so here's my presentation. I hope everything is visible. So first, let's unwrap a bit title of my presentation, which can be a bit confusing. As it was said, I would like to present a part of my doctoral research. I'm interested in a role of art as a tool for building a community and cultural institutions as an intermediary platform between artists and audiences. I was educated in the field of UX design, thanks to the postgraduate studies and University of Science and Technology in Krakow. And while exploring the theoretical foundations of UX approach, I noticed a lot of convergence with cultural strategies, curatorial strategies, and my experiences in the field of art history and cultural institutions. And the combination of those two seemingly separate fields, UX design and culture studies or art history, resulted in an interdisciplinary project, which I would like to present today. And therefore, the goal of my project is to apply UX design methods to research on contemporary art exhibition to find out whether they can help answer the most important research questions, such as how is contemporary art perceived today? Has the intensified activity of artists and art institutions on the internet contributed to increasing the audience's interest in such a virtual form of participation? How has the audience of art changed due to the spread of its internet forms? What are the needs of art users today in terms of art usability? And how can the very definition of art and its place in society change in the face of the so-called new normality? So-called new normality is a term used by publicists to draft the changed socio-political situation connected with global COVID crisis. While vaccination programs have been in place to contain the spread of the disease for some time now in most of the global West, the threat is still real. Social relations have changed over the past 2 years, also due to increased isolation, the transfer of interpersonal relationship to the internet, and also due to economic problems. All these conditions must be taken into account while looking at contemporary activities of art institutions. I would like also to emphasize at the beginning that my research were taken mainly in Polish context, but I think that in today's globalized world, it can be actually quite generalized. But previously it was in Poland. So what is a UX as a research method? The user experience research or UX research or UX design is a very extensive branch of research used in commercial companies, most often in the process of design of virtual project or service. They can be used at various stages of the process, for example, before designing to gather information about the needs of the target group. They can also be used to verify the functionality, interface design, transparency, intuitiveness, and attractiveness of the graphic design. Modern companies, in order to achieve best results and constantly improve their efficiency, most often work in the iteration mode of individual phases, also repeating various types of user tests at various stages of work. It is worth pointing out that the majority of former reports on similar field in terms of researching users of museums called audience development were based on research conducted in the form of interviews and observations of institutions and not exactly considering the perspective of end users. And this is the fundamental change that I propose in my approach to the research. Instead of examining only creators, the research should primarily cover the audience. It is a more difficult task but it is possible with the use of appropriate tools, and it brings completely new knowledge in the field of humanities and cultural studies. Methods, in its methods, UX research draws on the experience of academic sciences, such as social sciences, including sociology and ethnography. It uses methods such as individual in-depth interviews or ethnographic observations. On the other hand, UX research was also found in marketing research, for example, in the form of very popular focus interviews. Of course, during the development of its field of UX research, it also developed its own very unique methods used by UX researchers. And these are, for example, A/B tests, card sorting, mouse movement tracking, participatory workshops, and most of all, usability testing. The key role in UX research methodologies is played by inferring users' habits and preferences, not based on their declarations, as in the case of survey analysis, but on behavior observation, voice tone interpretation, or facial expressions. Therefore, high cultural competences, empathy, and perceptiveness of the researcher are extremely important values. Some of these techniques developed by UX research as own methods can be used for research into both real and virtual objects, and some only for virtual products. That is why it is important to select and adapt tools for each individual case each time. And here is an example of digital method, which is eye tracking, very typical to UX research. Eye tracking is a method of measuring with special IT equipment, measuring the point of gaze and motion of an eye in terms of mapping the point of focus. On the left image, you can see the heat map, which is mapping the points of focus of the viewer, of the user. And on the right side, there is this IT equipment. And of course, I was trying to use digital methods for real-world experiences as well. I developed an experiment on visitors' path tracking. As part of the experiment, I used an 8-hour video from 2 camera angles published on Facebook by Zachęta National Art Gallery in Warsaw, recorded during the opening of the exhibition. In 2020, it was the time between lockdowns, and the art institution decided to show screening live screening from the opening online. Using software adapted to image recognition, it was possible to obtain a picture of the greatest activity of visitors in this particular time period, in this particular place. A heat map, you can see on the right, was created, which, when applied to a very sketchy plan of the room in which the show took place, can show the visiting paths of the exhibition. Of course, due to the low quality of the recordings and technical difficulties, the image obtained is characterized by very little detail, and it is impossible to infer the actual degree of interest in individual objects at the exhibition on its basis. However, just starting the experiment shows that with little effort to refine the input data in cooperation with institution, we can get very interesting results. The most important UX method is usability test, which I also carried out in a few examples I would like to share. The exhibition, regardless of its type, individual or collective, contextual or narrative, as categorized by theoreticians, is a medium that serves purposes designed by its curators. And these goals can be divided into 2 main categories. First, cognitive goals, a willingness to provide information, or secondly, affective goals, evoking emotional response. The ideas behind the exhibition are manifested not only in the form of textual messages, but also and perhaps above all in spatial relations, visual sequences, sound impressions, etc. And therefore, the study of exhibitions requires an interdisciplinary approach, careful observation of the conditions of presentations, as well as considering all limitations and understanding social context in which they take place. And the question I want to answer through my research is if the goal of the exhibition is being achieved, does the user come out with specific knowledge or emotions? So in the first phase of my project, I decided to examine existing functioning models, exhibitions currently taking place in popular Warsaw art institution, which was Zachęta National Art Gallery and Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw. It was two group exhibitions organized as part of the Anti-Fascist Year program in Poland, with similar goals and similar assumptions, but in two slightly different institutions. And second round, early 2020, was also in the same institutions, but this is a part of research covered exhibitions belonging to the category of individual exhibitions, presenting works of one artist and exclusively paintings. The research objectives that I adopted were to verify the utility of or effectiveness of the exhibition in reaching the recipients with programmed message and evoking specific emotions. How does it look like? I went to the gallery with the examined person one-to-one and watched her way of visiting and asked questions or simple tasks. For example, imagine that you're a guide to this exhibition, or how would you explain this part of exhibition to a child? I recorded my observation with a camera and a voice recorder for later analysis. And first, conclusions and challenges that I met on my way. The result of these exhibitions have led to some general conclusions about how visitors explore the exhibitions. The more the exhibition is focused on a cognitive goal, on the transfer of knowledge, the more users expect clear indications as to the order of viewing, interpretation of works, and a clear ideological order. On the other hand, exhibitions with high degree of affective impact without a specific content goal and a clear theoretical framework are more likely to be chosen to be perceived creatively and individually, and do not evoke such a need to show the way, to follow the right steps. Recipients immediately assume that they are in the field of art and they do not need to understand it. There are also some challenges I met. You can see it on the right part of this slide, like this temporality of exhibitions and the need to adapt the tools to each case separately, cooperation with institutions, which can be problematic due to some specific restrictions, and accessibility, separating the problems of accessibility and the usefulness of art, which should be researched quite differently. And if you pay attention to the dates of my initial round, you should be aware what happened next. So due to the lockdown and the corona crisis, art institutions in Poland and worldwide were closed, and most of them were made to focus on virtual reality. So I started to research on virtual exhibitions. I used some methods, maybe more elaborative, maybe more connected to virtual products, which is initial survey on past experiences and expectations, unmoderated remote usability tests, and user experience questionnaire, which is a tool prepared and adapted by me, but prepared by German team. Among the various formats of online exhibitions, as we could yesterday hear, there are a lot of formats for online exhibitions. I choose the most creative and promising ones, which turn out to be the work of not the most prestigious state institutions, but rather independent small galleries. At the same time, the most recognizable online exhibition formats that my surveyed persons declared were films from real exhibitions with the curator visible in on a screen or not, and visiting virtual mapping of real galleries as in a Google Street View. These observations indicate that large institutions have not learned yet to take full advantage of the technological possibilities offered by virtuality, but rather focus on copying models of work and display in ways they know from real world. There was also this tendency to just wait for normal times to come back, which, as we know, didn't happen. So I took those two examples, Trouble with Double from little art gallery, Grey House Szara Kamienica, and Origins from art gallery Local 30 in Warsaw. I did unmoderated user testing. I decided to go with unmoderated tests because the online exhibition experience is strictly individual and can be done at any time. And thanks to the possibility of recording the subject's face and the screen view and the mouse movement, I was able to trace emotional reactions to specific elements. And this is how I could see it. I also did this user experience questionnaire. It's an open source research tool developed by a German team led by Dr. Martin Schrepp. And the questionnaire examines the perception of the 6 dimensions of user experience: attractiveness, efficiency, clarity, reliability, stimulation, and novelty. And on those scales, online exhibitions were rated by users as highly innovating and stimulating, but rather ineffective and highly unreliable as a tool. Conclusions. The first conclusions from this round of research into the usefulness of online virtual exhibition is that online exhibitions are not well recognized and defined by the users. Secondly, users, despite experience with virtual reality and first or third person interfaces, mostly do not understand the way of navigating through the virtual space of the exhibition, sometimes due to technical reasons like program error, sometimes due to being absorbed by the content. Hence, I conclude that users do not equate visiting the exhibition with entertainment, such as a computer game, or do not recognize similarities at the interface level, which is why they find it so difficult to discover how to navigate with arrows and not with a mouse or touchpad. Online exhibition open in browser, in which users are used to scrolling and moving in a flat top-down perspective, rather than using a keyboard, also used to navigate deep into virtual space. Users try to transfer behavior patterns from real galleries. Based on this observation, it can be assumed that in a non-research situation, visiting an exhibition would take several minutes and be terminated in the absence of interaction with the work. In this sense, it can be concluded that the real and virtual exhibitions are similar. They can both get boring and be misunderstood at the level of artistic content. And the entry threshold depends on the advancements of the user's digital competencies. But then the subsequent perception depends more on the cultural competencies. Nevertheless, the first barrier may be insurmountable if the users become discouraged or embarrassed by their lack of competence. Therefore, most of the impressions and perceptions of art remain obscured by the interface and the barriers it creates. This one I think we can skip due to the time limits. And what did global lockdown teach us? Reports on COVID situations of art institutions claims that some of them, as we also heard yesterday, noticed an over 100% increase in activity on their websites. They also conclude that there is a need for further exploration of the motivation and profile of virtual users who should not be abandoned by institutions when returning to their offline activities. Firstly, the digitalization of the art world is inevitable and necessary in the event of future crisis. The sooner institutions are able to adapt to virtual existence, the more they can benefit from it. Also, hierarchies existing in a real world can be turned upside down if only an institution previously considered smaller, peripheral, with more difficult access to a wide audience will present an attractive offer. This does not necessarily involve greater financial outlays. It mainly depends on the effective use of resources and reaching users with the right offer, tailored to their needs and desires. This also connects with reaching new audiences. And I think I don't need to convince anyone here that web access to culture is easier and cheaper for users suffering with different exclusions. It also means losing other audiences, which was also observed, like seniors and older people who weren't able to get online in touch with the art institution. And first of all, it wasn't their purpose, because their purpose of getting in touch with art institution is to contact each other, to have a physical presence in the space with other people, which was of course impossible in lockdown situation. Increased competitiveness in the offer of spending free time. The digital revolution has speeded up and has forced institutions to radically rethink how people should experience culture and art, and if they can provide attractive leisure activity. And I think it's worth pointing also that as former chief of digital officer at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, said already back in 2016, Met competition is Netflix and the Candy Crush and not other museums. And during the global lockdown, it was even more visible because they shared the same platform, which is internet. Changes in accessibility to visitors makes art institutions rethink their priorities. If their priority is safety of visitors or safety of artworks or commercial success, and these changes in accessibility were, of course, mostly in terms of in-person meeting with art, which means social distances, using face masks and gloves. Art institution modes in new modality can went in three ways: real world exhibitions, virtual exhibitions, or hybrid, which is probably the most suitable form of showing art these days. Hybrid, I mean on-site show with extensions or additions in virtual world, not replacing, not directly copying the virtual, the real in the virtual, but adding and extending the offer for these new audiences gained throughout the lockdown situation. And since the first global lockdown, the situation in galleries, both in Poland and globally, has not returned to the pre-pandemic state. So the experience of visiting a gallery cannot be compared in these conditions to the experience studied before March 2020. So the new normal came in and took everything away. And the change in the use of culture in so-called new normality has two levels, and each of which requires separate reflection and examination. On one hand, today's experience of the user of a real art gallery has changed because the threat of infection is still real. And on the other hand, the experience of virtual contact with culture and art has gained more attention. So my main hypothesis then is the need to shift the old concept of an art spectator, art viewer, or art participant, or gallery visitor to the category of user that has been developing over the past 1 or 2 decades, but has definitely grown in strength over the past years due to the pandemic. So far, cultural and visual studies have used two descriptive categories that characterize the recipient of a work of art. First, the modernist, a model of the spectator, viewer, as you can see in this slide, functioning until the participatory breakthrough in art. Second is the participant, a model typical for engaged art projects. The viewer, treated as a passive receiver of a performance or event, acted in contrast to an active and efficient artist whose labor resulted in a work of art. Contrary to the purely visual viewer model, the participant was categorized as the one who, invited by the artist to collaborate, creates the matter of an art project and has illusory agency and possible some impact on the final meaning of the work. In this way, the focus was shifted from the visual model to the participatory one. The participation has been criticized by Marco Smithson and then by Claire Bishop, who revealed how audiences' politics build artificial health, in which audiences are only seemingly involved in the creation process, while, as she formulates after the Rancière, the truly emancipatory character that art posits can only be achieved by going beyond the assigned roles. And this category of liberating interaction with art is described by theoretician Stephen Wright as the use. And the new recipient is called by him the user of art. The use in Wright's concept, however, is not consistent with the aims and purpose of the work. In this sense, it is synonymous to making use of the phenomena experience. So, similarly to UX design, it puts the user's perspective in the first place. UX is therefore the most appropriate approach to the new times of art and related to the new normality. In this presentation, I focus on methods of research, but there is also this very elaborative theoretical background in culture and visual studies. I would love to develop another time. But why do art institutions then need UX specialists? I would like to conclude with this slide. Firstly, to understand their audience's perspective. Then to learn and verify how the exhibitions they prepare affect the recipients. To be able to include the perspective of all the users in the process of designing or curating the exhibition, and to respond to the needs of changing society and serve as a platform for social exchange between artists and public. So if you are running an art institution and don't have any UX specialist in your team, please go and hire one now. Thank you for your attention.